I'm going to introduce grasses and how to ID them, as well as how they can be helpful for conservation. So up on the screen there is a picture of a certain grass. I want you to guess what that grass is. Just pause the video, put it down in the comments, and we'll see what crazy guesses show up. This grass has a purple panicle, and it does fade over time to a more whitish sort of colour, and it does have a white form, so you can get them two mixed up quite a bit. And it is called Holcus lanatus, or with its common name, Yorkshire fog. I'm going to go through the objectives I'm going to do today. So you will learn about the different inflorescence, which is the different flowering heads. You'll understand how to label a spikelet and what a spikelet is, and I'll give a brief introduction on the structure of grasses, for example ligules and auricles, and what they are. And you will be able to explain some key identifying features specific for certain grasses, for example Holcus lanatus. Now Holcus lanatus is spelt wrong on the objectives, so just ignore that, and the correct spelling will show up later. So why would you want to identify grasses? It's the most widespread plant globally. It covers a quarter of the world's available surface area, and grass species are adapted to specific conditions. For example, Agrostis stolonifera is common on damp and wetland habitats on fertile soil. They can tell you about the soil, for example soil moisture. They can tell you about the nutrients present or the pH of the soil. Is it acidic? Is it alkaline? And it helps identify habitats of conservation value. If you don't know what's in the habitat, you can't manage for it. We can talk about the flowering head, which is also known as an inflorescence. So there are three main types. Today we're going to cover the spike and the panicle. The spike. So a spike is a stalk, a main stalk, and there are no side stalks, and the spikelets are seated on the main axis itself. So carry this up here. So this is the main spike called the rachis. This main stalk in the middle is called the rachis, and off from this rachis are these outgrowths of florets, which are called spikelets. So to repeat that, you have a main axis stem called a rachis, and out from that you have spikelets. There's also various different types of spikes. You've got the cylindrical spike, which is common on cat's tail or timothy, which is literally just a spike, and you can't really see the spikelets. It's the same for meadow foxtail. Moving on to the panicle. So the panicle is a loosely branched pyramidal inflorescence form. So you've got the picture in the middle, which is Yorkshire fog, Holcus lanatus, and the picture on the right, which is Agrostis stolonifera. You can see it's very loosely branched. There's a lot of air movement that can move through there, and it's in a pyramidal shape. So some other clues that the inflorescence can give you to help you ID a grass. Is it one-sided? Does it have an obvious front and an obvious back? For example, cock's foot. So the two images here, they're cock's foot. The image on the left is the front of the cock's foot, and then the image on the back is the right is the image of the back of the cocksfoot. You can clearly see that you can see the stalk going onto the spikelets over there. And then if we move to the far right image, this is a crested dogtail. This is a side shot, so you can clearly see the back over here with with the flowers not pointing this way, and on the right you have the florets pointing this way, which is the front and the back. So what makes up the inflorescence flowering head? So as mentioned earlier, you have the rachis, which is the main stem or the main access stem of an elongated inflorescence on which spikelets are joined. So this is the rachis. And then attached to the rachis is a pedicel. So a pedicel is this little tiny stalk here, and it's so spikelets, which are here, are attached to the pedicel, which is then attached to the rachis. So the rachis is the main axis stem, and then off from that stem comes the pedicel, which is a tiny stalk. Then off from the pedicel are your spikelets. And if you have a pedicel, you're usually looking at a panicle inflorescence like these. So moving on to spikelets and sessile. So spikelet, as mentioned earlier, is a small secondary spike. Now on this image, it's an image of a ryegrass. But you can see you've got the rachis, which is, again, the main axis stem. And then off from that, you have the spikelet. You don't have a pedicel. And that's because this is sessile. So the spikelets are directly attached to the flowering stalk. So there's no tiny stalk at all. There is no pedicel. Now more information on the spikelet. So the spikelet is comprised of many different features which help identify them, as they're all different. So you start off with the lower glume and the upper glume. The upper glume is definitely not up here. It's down here, just above the lower glume. And then inside the lower glume you have the first floret and the second floret, and so on. Again, so this is slightly different naming. You've got the rachilla. So this is the central axis of the spikelet. So the rachilla is the central axis of the spikelet, whereas the rachis is the central axis of the flower head or inflorescence. Coming off from the floret, there is an awn. So I'll go into a definition later and explain more about them. However, if you look closely at the floret on the right image, you can see that there is something called a lemma and a palea. Now these are both florets. So this first floret and the second floret, they're both external florets. So they're just on the external of the spikelet, compared to these internal, which are on the internal side of the spikelet. And these external florets are called lemmas. So lemmas are external florets. They're on the outside of the spikelet. And then you have the inside, the internal, which are called the palea, which is right here, palea. And then off from the palea again is the awn. So palea, internal, lemma, external. Giving more definition about awns. So an awn is either a hair or bristle on a larger structure. They are a characteristic of various grass species, for example Baron Brome, or its Latin name Bromus sterilis. So they can be very long, like wall barley, and they can be very short, like red fescue. Now the picture on the left is actually a wavy hairgrass, and you can see it's quite long, the ornets, this outgrowth here. Quite a few of them. And then if we move to the image on the right, which is red fescue, you can see it's really quite small. So you've got the long awn on the wavy hair grass compared to the short awn on the red fescue. More about awns. So they can be absent, for example Melissa nutans, and they can be present on both glooms or lemurs. Moving to this picture on the left here, you can see that this is a gloom right here, and from the gloom there is an awn. You can see how it's attached there. And then if we move to the right image, you can see that these are both lemurs. They were situated in here, and they've come up through here, and these are the awns. And they can be straight or bent, and you can see that this is bent. Awns can be present from the tip or from partway down the back. So what this means, if you look at the image on the left, is that this is of a false oak grass. And if we zoom in on the false oak grass spikelet, you can see we've got the lower glooms and lower and upper glooms. Then you have the lemurs. You can see that if you follow the awn down, it's attached to the lemurs about halfway. On the image before, it attached at the base of the lemur. However, this time it's attaching in the middle of the lemur, and it can also be attached from the tip. Growth forms. Each grass has different growth form which can help distinguish what it is. On the left we have Agrostis stolonifera. Now this has a creeping mat forming habit which is really easily identifiable. Whereas on the right you have Yorkshire fog or Holcus lanatus, and you can also see it's got a reddish purple pinkish base, but it's tufted. It's a tufted growth form. Above ground horizontal stems are called rhizomes. This image are called stolons. Rhizomes are underneath the soil. So if we look at this image, you can see that just above the soil line there is this root, these side shoots of grasses that are going to grow up and also anchor the plant in place, and this is above ground, whereas you've got the same thing underground, and this is called a rhizome. So horizontal stems above ground are called a stolon, below ground are called a rhizome. Structure of grasses and leaves, how they can help us ID a grass. So this blade here is also called lamina. So this is called a lamina. If we move to the collar region, so this is made up of an auricle and a ligule. And you have the sheath here, which wraps around the stem. Focusing on the ligule and auricle, on the left you have a zoomed in picture of an auricle. You you can see that they are very distinct. This white bit here, very distinct, and it wraps around the stem. You can have various different types of auricles. I'll go into more detail in a later slide. However, this is why it's important to have a hand lens, because it's really hard to see auricles and ligules with the naked eye, and it's really helpful to get a hand lens to help you identify grasses. So we've got the stem or culm, we've got the sheath down here, and then we have the leaf or the blade. This growth of membranous tissue is called a ligule. This one's quite pointed. You can see how it differs from the auricle, because this is attached to the sheath and this is also attached to the sheath. However, this wraps around compared to this. This ligule can get a lot more damaged than the auricle, unfortunately, and the ligule is really key in helping identify grasses. There's many different types of auricles, however, I'm just going to go over a few here. So you've got the large glabrous auricles, so similar to one before, it wraps around on these weird claw-like shapes. Whereas here you've got it short with hairs. Now just a reminder, glabrous means no hairs, so it's smooth. So this here is short with hairs, whereas you have an auricular lobe and hairs at the blade base. You've got hairs at the blade base with an auricular lobe. Then there's more claw-like, and you've got short and stubby, and even absent. So not all plants have an auricle. It's the same with the ligule. Not all plants have a ligule that you can see, or even a ligule. Now moving on to ligules. They are membranous, like this. This one's quite short. Membranous and long and acute, so pointed. You can also have membranous and long, with like a squarish shape, and you can have membranous with hair-like projections right here, or membranous rim with hairs, or just a rim of hairs. You don't have to have a ligule, you can have just a rim of hairs. This is a close-up of a sweet vernal grass ligule and auricle. Now you can see that it wraps around there, but it doesn't wrap all the way, so there's a gap here. And there's quite a big, furry hairs on this sheath and on the stem. And this is the flower head of the sweet vernal grass. And try not to get this confused with crested dogtail, because they are quite similar. I'm going to go through some in-depth identifying features of certain grasses, where I will discuss the flower heads, the inflorescence, the growth habits, and some more features. So on the left you have a picture of the inflorescence. Now the inflorescence hasn't come out yet, it's still in its early form, and it's usually an open panicle. As mentioned earlier, it is a tufted growth form, and it has a purple sheath near the base at the soil level. If we have a closer look at the ligule, you can see it's quite tall, and it's got these jagged pointed ends. The ligule does get quite damaged quite easily, so it's quite hard to rely on the ligule for IDing. So try and always try and look at as many ligules as you can, just in case one has been damaged and you miss ID due to it. So it's also hairy on the leaves, as well as quite hairy on the sheath, and it feels quite furry. It grows to about 120 centimetres tall, and it flowers and fruits early June to late August, or even as early as mid-May. And it prefers fertile soils with a pH of about 5 to 6 that have slightly impeded drainage. Now, if you see Yorkshire Fog or Holcus lanatus, which is the correct spelling, on a grassland, you can roughly guess that the pH is somewhere around 5 to 6. And this is why it's so good to identify grasses, because you learn about the area, you know the pH, you know the rough pH, without even having to soil test. Creeping softgrass, or Holcus mollis. This is easily confused with Yorkshire Fog, Holcus lanatus. However, this is white, and it is drastically different if you're focusing on it. So its key identifying factor is that it has hairy nodes. As you can see here on this image, it's loosely tufted or a mat-forming rhizomaceous perennial. So it has rhizomes, which are the horizontal stems below ground. It grows to 110 centimetres, so 10 centimetres shy of the Yorkshire Fog, and it flowers and fruits late June to late August. And it's widespread in the British Isles and prefers woodland with acidic or neutral soils. So that's a pH of about 6 to 7. From this image, you can gather that the leaves are also quite furry, as well as the sheath, and the ligule is quite ragged. However, they cannot be curved, as this may just be damaged, which is why it's so important to not always depend on the ligule. And the panicle is quite open. The inflorescence is a panicle, and it's quite open. Spreading meadowgrass, or Parapratensis subspecies irrigata. So the blades are flat, while the junction with the sheath is hairy, just over here and here. So the blades are flat, the blade referring to the lamina, while the junction with the sheath, which is here, is hairy. You can see the tiny hairs right here. And it prefers permanent damp grassland, marshland, stream and river banks, road verges and waste places. And this plant's genetic makeup varies drastically from plant to plant. Its spikelets are quite down, they're pointed quite downwards, and it has an erect, tall form. And again, you've got your lower glume and your upper glume. Sweet vernal grass, Anthoxanthum odoratum. So Anthoxanthum odoratum. It's a loosely hair-tufted perennial, and it grows up to about 100 centimetres high. And there is a similar grass called annual vernal grass that is unfortunately no longer present in Ireland, and it's scarce in Scotland and Wales. It disappeared and started to rapidly disappeared and declined 30 years ago, but it's easily identifiable as it has a smaller growth habit than sweet vernal grass, as well as significantly longer awns. Awns are these. You've got the lower glume and the upper glume. It's got a quite tall form, tall straight form, again at 100 centimetres high, and it's tufted. It's a loosely haired tufted perennial. We look at the ligule auricle. You can see it's quite hairy near where the auricle would be, and its ligule is quite tall. Crested dogtail, Cynosaurus cristatus. Cynosaurus cristatus. It's a tufted perennial up to 80 centimetres tall, and its ligule, right here, membranous ligule, is 0.5 millimetres tall to 2 millimetres tall. So you can check that just in case. So it can be quite tall. The panicle is narrowly oblong, about 3 to 10 centimetres. So right here it is a panicle. You would believe this is a spike, however it's a panicle. And there are awns present right here. They are quite small, but they are present, and they're attached at the tip of the florets. Remember, internal is Palea, external is Lemur. And it flowers and fruits early June to mid-August, but rarely to September or early October, or even early October. And if you compare this with sweet vernal grass, you can see that it's very, very different. This has drastically a different shape. It's definitely a lot longer. Its inflorescence a lot longer. And it has a lot less leaves on the plant, and they're a lot lower down, which is why it finds it hard to compete with other more stronger, more aggressive grasses. False oak grass, or Arhenthanthemum elatius. This is a loosely tufted perennial that grows up to 180 centimetres tall, so quite decent size, and its culms are glabrous or hairy at the nodes. So what that means is its culms, which is the stem, as you can also see here, are smooth, and it can be hairy at the nodes, which are here. It flowers and fruits from late May or early June onwards, often persisting into October, and it has 2 spikelets per pedicel, and it can even have 3 to 4, however that is rare, and only the upper lemur has an awn attached. So only the upper lemur, which is here, has an awn, which is here, attached. So there's only one awn, essentially. However, there are some instances where that is not the case, and it is harder to idea when that happens. So the other lemurs and glooms bearing no awn or only a very short awn, as you can see here. So you've got the main awn, and then the small awn. It's late flowering, and often they have their inflorescences blackened and distorted by an infection called loose smut. So this will turn black and distorted by an infection called loose smut. Its ligule is quite ragged and it's quite short, however it is still a decent size compared to some. And its auricle is bent, and it's attached to the lemur. Creeping bent, or Agrostis stolonifera. It's got a very open panicle a loose panicle, a very pointed membranous ligule, and it spreads by stolons right here, which are above ground, and it's loosely to densely tufted. It grows up to about 120 centimetres tall and is most common on damp, wetland areas with fertile soil. It also likes disturbed soil, but it rarely occurs growing with tall vegetation, as they usually outcompete it. Another image of the tall ligule here. Red fescue or Festuca rubra is a loosely or densely tufted with rhizomes, or sometimes without, because it's so close together. It grows up to 100 centimetres tall and has very narrow bristle-like leaves. Very narrow bristle-like leaves, and can be found on chalk and limestone grasslands, in heaths, salt marshes, sand dunes, sea cliffs, hills and mountain pasture, as well as rock ledges. So it's a very widely available plant. It's got a very dense cluster. Its flower head is a very dense cluster of florets. Its ligule is quite small. It's very tall as well, at 100 centimetres tall. Wall barley or Hordeum morinum. Hordeum morinum. So wall barley is an annual that grows up to 70 centimetres tall. There is a pedicel, however it does not exceed 0.6 millimetres. So you wouldn't expect there to be a pedicel, however there is one present, but it doesn't exceed 0.6 millimetres. It flowers late May or early June to mid-August, or even as late as early October. Wall barley is common and widespread throughout lowland England and Wales. Where it occurs in grassland, it is almost always in disturbed and open sites, such as open paths or bare patches in parkland, or in sheep and cattle enclosures. In pasture, it requires fertile soils of moderate high pH, mostly 6.5 to 8.5, and open, frequently disturbed habitats. So it needs frequently disturbed habitats because it's an annual and it seeds itself every single year. If you look at the ligule, it's quite short, and it's got these outer pointed auricles. The two right pictures, the one on the left, is the actual spikelet of the wall barley compared to another different barley, and it's really quite different because you've got hairs here and you've hairs here. So hairs on the other barley just around here, but you've got hairs here while it's barren there, and it's quite compact here. The awns are quite long compared to the compact small structure. Rather, the other barley has a very open structure, and you can see there's one floret, another floret, and a central. And there's also there is a central. There's two small ones, and there's one here and one here. Greater quaking grass or Britza maxima. By the name you can tell it's big. It's got big spikelets. It's an annual up to 60 centimetres tall, which you wouldn't expect from a maxima size, and in fact it's the exact same size as the other quaking grass, which is 60 centimetres tall. Its ligule is a bluntly rounded membrane, about 3 to 3.5 millimetres. and the panicle is loose and open. The Britza maxima does not have many spikelets on per stalk, mostly bearing no more than one large spikelet. When naturalised in the south, it occurs in dry open places such as banks, field margins or cultivated ground in similar habitats to Britza minor, which is the other quaking grass, lesser quaking grass. Elsewhere it may appear on sand dunes and cliffs, or as casual in waste ground, rubbish bins, gardens and pavements. It's quite a tall ligule, bluntly rounded membrane ligule. It's quite tall. And if you look at the spikelet, very distinct. Sorry, not this one. This one. Very, very distinct. And there's not many per spike. Not many. I believe there's max of 7, I believe, per spike. There's 6 here, but it is a max of 7. This is off Britza minor, so you can compare the difference. Definitely a bigger structure compared to this more pyramidal shaped of the Britza minor. We're going to guess the grass. Guess this grass. Pause the video. So it has a very loose, open, panicle-shaped inflorescence. It's got stolons and a creeping mat forming growth form, and it's got a pointed ligule. Pointed ligule. This grass is Agrostis stolonifera. Moving on to the next grass. So this grass has hairy knees. It's known for its hairy knees. And it's very similar to Yorkshire frog and can often be mistaken. And it's got a white, open panicle. It's Holcus mollis. Moving on to this grass. It's got a very tall growth form. You can see it's lightening there. You've got a lower and upper gloom. It's very hairy near the auricle and the ligule. The ligule's quite tall, and you can see its flower form there. It's sweet vernal grass, Anthoxanthum odoratum. So sweet vernal grass, Anthoxanthum odoratum. If you look at the auricle closely, you can see it's red. It's not usually red. It can be a mix of various different colours. It can be red, it can be green. Definitely not always red. Moving on to this mystery grass. So the blades are flat. While the junction with the sheath is hairy. So the junction with the sheath is hairy here. The membrane is also hairy and it's quite tall. It's quite a tall membrane, and the sheath near the auricle is hairy. And it prefers permanent damp grassland, marshland, stream and riverbanks, road verges and waste places. This is Poa pratensis, subspecies irrigata. Moving on to this plant. It grows up to 70 centimetres tall. The ligule is about 0.4 to just 1 millimetre tall, and it's membranous and these sharp pointing out auricles. This is the other version. This is the other grass spikelet, and this is the actual spikelet for this certain grass. It's very compact with long awns. And there's a picture of the inflorescence right here. It's woolbarley or Hordeum murinum. Moving on to this one. So this one's a really easy one. We've just gone over it. Really easy to identify. It's got these big spikelets, really easily big spikelets. There's only 7 per spike, or yeah, inflorescence. It's got a very tall ligule, and it grows up to 60 centimeters tall. It's Britza maxima, or greater quaking grass. Moving on to resources. Resources are definitely major help when IDing grasses. For example, you need the images of the ligules and the auricles and all that sort of stuff. You need the information on is it a panicle, is it a raceme inflorescence, where does it grow, does it prefer wetland, acidic, grassland, heathland. BSBI is great for that. They do guides where they show you the ligule, the awns. They do pictures of the grass. They tell you how tall it is. For example, woolbarley is 70 centimeters. And it's free. So if you go to the website, do this link, it should take you to some free IDing sheets. There aren't very many, but they have the common ones like Agrostis stolonifera and Yorkshire fog, which is Holcus lanatus. You have them very quick ones, so you can look at them when you try and ID a grass, and it may help quite a bit. I've also done a Quizlet. So Quizlet is a flashcard app, and I've done a few on grasses. For example, a few definitions like pedicel, what an awn is, what a spikelet is, different inflorescence, and more will be coming to it as I add later. Hope you enjoyed it, hope you learned a lot, and I hope you start IDing grasses.